the Spring Maiden's veil. The sun sagged low on the horizon, a smouldering ember in a sky choked with haze. Across the parched fields of Altheris, wind stirred clouds of dust that carried no promise of rain. Once, this was a land of rivers that hummed their songs to the fertile earth, where orchards blushed with fruit and golden wheat swayed in unison with the breeze. Now, the earth cracked beneath the weight of a silence too heavy to bear. In the castle high above the withering plains, Prince Elian stood by the great window, his hands clasped behind his back. He gazed not at the expanse of his kingdom, but at the distant line where the world seemed to end, the edge of the forest so old it predated the memory of men. Whispers of the Spring Maiden filled the chambers of his mind, a figure wrapped in mystery and blossoms, whose fleeting appearance each spring marked miracles for the deserving. The stories were as ancient as the forest itself. It was said the maiden emerged only when winter's last breath faded, her arrival heralded by a burst of petals and perfumed air. Those she deemed worthy found themselves recipients of her blessings. Fortunes reversed, ailments healed, and, it was rumored, even the sky coaxed a weep rain where it had once refused. Elian turned from the window and paced, his boots echoing against the stone floor. His advisors had already abandoned hope. They spoke of rationing what meager resources remained and preparing for an exodus. Yet, something within him rebelled. Was he not the Prince of Altheris? Was it not his duty to secure its salvation? But the thought was quickly soured by doubt. The stories of the maiden were nothing more than legends spun to entertain children. Or were they? Had the drought not driven the rational mind to the edge of faith? Nightfall found Elian astride his steed, a solitary figure riding against the whispering wind. He carried no retinue, for this journey demanded solitude. Beneath him, the earth crunched dryly, and above, the stars cast a pallid light, as though even they mourned the land's decay. The forest loomed ahead, a silhouette of ancient shadows, its trees standing sentinel-like, guarding secrets as old as the kingdom. It was said the maiden's presence could be felt before it was seen. Elian's heart quickened as he crossed the threshold into the woods, where the air seemed heavier, laden with something unspoken. A subtle shift surrounded him, a rustling in the trees that wasn't merely wind, a scattering of petals that danced in his peripheral vision before vanishing. "Why do you come, princeling?" The voice came not from the earth nor the heavens, but from somewhere in between. It was soft yet sharp, like the edge of a petal kissed by frost. Elian reined his horse, scanning the darkened forest, but there was no figure, no source of the voice. "To seek the maiden," he said, his voice steady, though his pulse thundered in his ears. "My people suffer, and the rains have abandoned us. If the stories are true, she may grant us her mercy." The trees seemed to murmur among themselves, their leaves whispering secrets Elian could not hear. A faint light glimmered ahead, and he dismounted, tethering his horse to a low branch. As he stepped forward, the forest seemed to close behind him, swallowing the path and cutting off all routes of retreat. The light led him to a grove where the air carried the scent of blossoms, sweet yet laced with something elusive, as if the fragrance danced just beyond his grasp. A single petal floated down from above, and as it touched the ground, the grove brightened, revealing an ancient willow in the center. Its bark glowed faintly, etched with markings that seemed alive, shifting under his gaze. "Do you know what you seek?" the voice asked again, this time emanating from the willow itself. Elian hesitated, the weight of the question pressing upon him. "I seek hope," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "Hope for my people and for myself." The willow's branches swayed, though no wind moved them. "The forest sees truth, Princeling. It does not answer to ambition or pride. Step forward if you dare, and let the maiden judge the heart you carry." A path of petals unfurled before him, each step taking him deeper into the grove. The air thickened with the scent of flowers and the faint echo of a song without words. Elian knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones, that this was only the beginning. He did not know what awaited him beyond the petals, but he could not turn back now. The path of petals led Prince Elian into a shadowed realm where time seemed to twist and fold upon itself. The air grew thick, and the canopy of ancient trees wove a tapestry so dense that even the moonlight could not penetrate. Yet, the path before him glowed faintly, illuminated by an unseen source, guiding him deeper into the unknown. As he walked, the whispers began. At first they were indistinct murmurs, like the rustling of dry leaves, but soon they formed words, circling him like invisible specters. "Why do you seek her?" the voices asked in unison. There was no malice, only an unrelenting curiosity. Elian hesitated. He had rehearsed his answer 100 times. To save his people, to restore life to his kingdom. But the weight of the question now seemed to demand something more profound. "I seek her because I must," he finally replied. "Because there is no other way." The voices fell silent and the air grew colder. Ahead, the path split into 3, each root flanked by thorns that writhed like living creatures. The petals scattered and the light dimmed, leaving Elian to choose. The voices returned, now softer, almost coaxing. "Truth lies only in choice, Princeling. But beware, the path reflects the heart." Elian's eyes darted between the paths. The one to the left seemed to pulse with a warm, golden light, while the right exuded a silvery glow, cold and sharp. The middle path, by contrast, was shrouded in darkness, the thorns thicker and more menacing. He chose the middle path. With each step, the forest seemed to come alive. The thorns hissed, their barbs grazing his skin, drawing blood in thin, stinging lines. The whispers grew louder, their words now discernible. "Do you seek salvation, or do you seek glory?" "Salvation," he answered, though the word wavered on his tongue. He pressed on, the darkness growing heavier until it felt like a weight upon his shoulders. Just as the despair threatened to overwhelm him, the path opened into a small clearing. There, standing as if it had always been, was a silvered willow. Its bark shimmered faintly, and from its branches hung countless blossoms, their petals untouched by the shadows. The tree regarded him, or so it felt, as though it had eyes unseen. Then it spoke, its voice low and resonant. To quench the flame without water, it said, is to find harmony in chaos. Show me you understand. Before Elian could respond, a circle of fire burst to life at the base of the willow, its flames hungrily licking the air. It was no ordinary fire. It did not roar or crackle, but burned with an eerie stillness, as if it awaited his failure. Elian knelt beside the flames, his mind racing. He had no water, no tools, nothing but his wits and his will. As he reached out, the heat drove him back. Then a thought struck him. The fire was alive, its hunger mirroring his own desperation. To fight, it would only feed it. He took a deep breath, calming his mind, and exhaled slowly. The fire flickered. Another breath, steady and deliberate. The flames began to wane, shrinking with each exhalation until, finally, they dissolved into nothingness. The willow's branches swayed, though the air was still. You have passed the first trial, it said, but this is only the beginning. The petals at his feet shifted, forming a new path that led him deeper into the forest. His resolve hardened as he stepped forward, though the weight of the task pressed heavier with each step. Ahead, a faint cry pierced the stillness. He quickened his pace, emerging into a second clearing where a bird lay wounded, its wing bent at an unnatural angle, its eyes bright and full of pain, locked with his. The second trial, came the voice of the willow, now unseen, is to heal without medicine. Offer it what you cannot give yourself. Elian knelt, his heart aching at the sight of the fragile creature. He reached for it, but it flinched, its cries intensifying. He realized then that force would only deepen its fear. He lowered his hand, his voice soft and soothing as he spoke to it, though his words felt inadequate. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. The bird's cries grew quieter, and eventually it allowed him to cradle it in his hands. He held it gently, his warmth steady and unyielding, until the bird's trembling subsided. When he released it, the bird stretched its wings and took flight, leaving no trace of its injury. The voice returned, this time tinged with approval. You have shown patience and compassion, but the forest demands more. The final trial awaits. The petals reappeared, spiraling upward into the darkness. Elian followed, his breath steady, but his heart heavy. He did not know what awaited him at the end of the path, but he could feel the forest gaze, watching and waiting for him to falter. The third path unfolded before Prince Elian, like a labyrinth drawn by unseen hands. The blossoms no longer guided him with their soft luminescence. Instead, the air grew heavy, and the silence seemed alive, a presence that weighed upon his shoulders. He pressed forward, each step dragging him deeper into a realm that seemed to exist beyond the confines of the world he knew. The ground beneath his feet shifted, becoming soft and treacherous, as though the earth itself resisted his passage. The trees towered above, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their bark etched with patterns that resembled watchful eyes. The air was damp, tinged with the faint scent of decay. And then the voice of the forest returned, this time low and resonant, carrying with it a challenge. To carry the weight of your kingdom is not to bear it upon your shoulders, but to let its burden take root within your soul. Show me your strength, Princeling, not in your might, but in your surrender. The ground beneath him shuddered, and from the soil emerged a figure, not of flesh and blood, but of earth and shadow. It was massive, its body formed of cracked earth and twisted vines, its eyes burning with an inner light. In its hands, it held a vessel, ancient and worn, filled to the brim with what appeared to be liquid light, radiant and heavy. The figure stepped forward, towering over Elian, and extended the vessel. The voice echoed again, now from all directions. Take it, carry it, and do not spill a single drop. Elian hesitated. The vessel glowed with an intensity that seemed to pull at his very being, a weight that went beyond the physical. He reached out, his hands trembling, and grasped the vessel. The moment his fingers touched its surface, an unbearable heaviness surged through him, forcing him to his knees. It was as though he carried not just water, but the suffering of every soul in his kingdom. The figure watched silently as Elian struggled to stand. His legs quaked, his arms burned, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The burden pressed against him like an ocean against a fragile dam, threatening to overwhelm him. Yet, he did not yield. Each step forward was a battle. The forest floor seemed to shift and buckle beneath him, and the light in the vessel pulsed in rhythm with his faltering heart. Sweat dripped from his brow, mixing with the dirt on his face, but he pressed on, his focus unyielding. Why do you persist? The voice demanded, its tone sharper now. Your strength is failing, your body breaking. What hope do you have to succeed? Elian paused, the weight threatening to pull him into the ground. His voice, hoarse and strained, broke the silence. Because it is not my strength that matters. It is theirs, the people I serve. I carry this for them, not for myself. The ground seemed to still beneath him, and the forest fell silent. The vessel in his hands grew heavier still, its glow brighter, almost blinding. Elian's knees buckled, and he collapsed, the vessel slipping from his hands. But as it fell, the liquid within did not spill. Instead, it rose, shimmering in the air like a living thing. The shadowed figure stepped forward, its massive hands reaching out to lift the vessel. The voice returned, now softer, almost reverent. You have carried the burden not with pride, but with humility. You have failed in strength, yet triumphed in spirit. The forest has seen your heart, Princeling. The vessel dissolved into light, its radiance spreading outward and bathing the forest in warmth. The weight lifted from Elian, and he sank to the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. Around him, the darkness receded, and the blossoms returned, their soft glow illuminating the path ahead. As he struggled to his feet, a figure emerged from the shadows, draped in a veil of blossoms that seemed to shift and bloom with every step. the maiden appeared. Her presence filled the grove with an otherworldly light, and her voice, when she spoke, was like the wind through a field of reeds. "You have faced the trials and revealed your heart," she said, her tone neither cold nor warm, but impossibly serene. "But the truth is not yet complete. What you seek requires more than perseverance. It demands sacrifice." She extended her hand, and from it fell a single petal, wilted and faintly pulsing with light. "Carry this to the heart of your kingdom. Plant it where the land is most barren. Only then will you know the cost of what you seek." Elian took the petal, its fragility a stark contrast to the trials he had endured. He bowed his head, not in submission, but in understanding. The path forward was no longer shrouded in mystery, but it was far from easy. As the maiden turned and disappeared into the forest, her blossoms dissolving into the wind, Elian stepped forward, the petal in hand and his heart resolute. The journey back to Altheris was unlike the prince's departure. The forest, once a labyrinth of shadows and trials, now seemed subdued, as if its ancient sentinels watched in solemn approval. Yet Elian's steps were heavy, burdened not by exhaustion, but by the weight of the maiden's final gift. A single petal, wilted and fragile, cradled in his hands like a flickering ember of hope. The forest's edge emerged as dawn painted the sky in muted hues. The sunlight felt foreign after the otherworldly glow of the grove, yet the world outside seemed untouched by his transformation. The fields remained barren, the rivers cracked like forgotten bones, and the castle in the distance stood silent, its towers mourning their faded grandeur. Elian pressed onward, his resolve firm, even as the weight of failure loomed in his mind. What if the maiden's gift bore no fruit? What if his people's suffering persisted, unrelenting? The petal pulsed faintly in his palm, as if to remind him that despair had no place in his heart. When he arrived at the castle gates, the townsfolk gathered, their faces etched with desperation and weariness. Whispers rippled through the crowd like dry reeds brushing together. "The prince returns, but where is the rain? What has he brought us but a flower's death?" Elian held their gazes, his own shadowed by fatigue, but steady with resolve. He said nothing as he walked through the crowd, his boots stirring dust that settled just as quickly. At the castle's base, his most trusted advisor, Renna, awaited him. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, softened as they fell upon the prince. Yet her voice held skepticism as she spoke. "Your Highness, we awaited your return with hope. But what is this? A petal?" She gestured to the withered fragment in his palm, her brow furrowing. "How can this save our land?" Elian met her gaze and answered quietly. "I was not given promises, only the means to act. I must plant this where our soil is most barren." Renna hesitated, then nodded. The people needed hope, and the prince's determination was all they had. The heart of the kingdom was a wasteland. What had once been fertile fields now lay cracked and lifeless, their veins parched and empty. Elian knelt on the dry earth, his breath steady, though his hands trembled as he dug into the soil. The petal, faintly pulsing with the soft light, seemed to grow warmer as he placed it within the earth's embrace. "Grow," he whispered, his voice raw, barely audible. "Please." For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd behind him shifted uneasily, their murmurs growing louder, tinged with doubt. Then, a single droplet of water seeped from the ground, followed by another. The earth shuddered beneath their feet, and from the spot where the petal lay buried, a shoot emerged, delicate and green, yet imbued with a strength that belied its fragile appearance. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the shoot grew, unfurling into a sapling, then a tree. Its branches stretched skyward, blossoms blooming in impossible abundance. But this was no ordinary tree. It bore fruit that glowed faintly, like golden lanterns, and from its base flowed a crystal clear stream. The people surged forward, falling to their knees in awe. Renna, standing beside the prince, whispered, "It is a miracle." Yet Elian's gaze remained fixed on the tree. The maiden's words echoed in his mind. "Only then will you know the cost of what you seek." The air grew heavy, and a deep ache settled in his chest. The tree's blossoms trembled, shedding petals that dissolved into light. The golden fruit fell one by one, rolling to the feet of the townsfolk, who hesitated before picking them up. As the first bite was taken, cries of wonder erupted. Those who ate found their strength renewed, their ailments healed. But Elian faltered, his body growing weaker as the tree flourished. He stumbled, his hand pressed to his chest. Renna caught him, her face pale with concern. "Your Highness?" "The tree, it draws from me," he murmured. "It is my life it sustains." The realization was both agonizing and liberating. The maiden's trials had not been to prepare him for triumph, but for sacrifice. As the tree's roots deepened, its water spread, seeping into the cracked soil and breathing life into the barren land. The price was steep, but Elian bore it without regret. His people would live. He sank to his knees, his vision blurring as the tree glowed brighter, its light enveloping him. The last thing he saw was the faces of his people, no longer hollowed by despair, but illuminated by hope. And then, the world faded into warmth and silence. The tree stood as a monument to the prince's sacrifice, its blossoms whispering secrets on the wind. Each spring, its blooms cast petals across the land, ensuring prosperity and renewal. The people of Altheris spoke of their prince, not as a ruler, but as a savior who had given everything to restore life to the kingdom. And though the maiden was never seen again, the tree's blossoms carried her essence, a reminder of the trials faced and the truths revealed in the heart of the forest. Spring returned to Altheris with a vigor unseen in generations. Where once there had been lifeless plains, fields of wildflowers now swayed in the gentle breeze, their colors painting the horizon. The rivers, which had long since dried into hollow veins of despair, flowed once more with crystalline clarity. The people of the kingdom, weary no longer, moved with renewed purpose, their hearts buoyed by a miracle that had rewritten their fate. At the heart of this transformation stood the tree. It towered over the land, its branches sprawling wide and heavy with blossoms that glowed faintly, even in the midday sun. Each petal seemed to hum with life, a testament to the sacrifice that had brought the kingdom back from the brink of ruin. Its roots delved deep into the earth, drawing forth water and nourishment that spilled into the surrounding fields, a gift that continued to give. The people gathered often beneath its boughs, offering prayers and whispers of gratitude. They called it the Tree of Renewal, though its origins remain cloaked in mystery to most. Only a few knew the truth, that the tree was no mere act of nature, but the embodiment of their prince's final act of love. Rena stood in the shade of the tree, her eyes tracing the intricate patterns of its bark. She could almost hear Elian's voice in the rustle of its leaves, his resolve and sacrifice resonating in the air around her. She placed her hand on the trunk, feeling the faint thrum of life that pulsed within. "You gave everything," she murmured, her voice catching, "and yet you left us more than we could ever repay." The townsfolk had asked many questions in the days after the tree first took root. They had seen the prince falter and fall, his strength wicking away like the last drop of water from a drought-stricken river. But when they turned to look upon the tree, they found no trace of him. It was as if the land had absorbed him, making him part of its very essence. Rena had understood then that Elian had not vanished, but had become the tree's heart, his life force the catalyst for its miraculous growth. The seasons passed, and with them came a quiet understanding. The tree bore fruit that could heal the sick and sustain the weary, but its blossoms also carried something intangible, whispers on the wind, voices that seemed to belong to the earth itself. Farmers claimed they heard Elian's encouragement as they tilled their soil. Mothers swore the blossom's scent soothed their crying infants, and when the rains came, gentle and steady, it was as though the sky wept not with sorrow but with joy. The maiden's veil of blossoms had been cast over the kingdom, though she herself had not been seen since that fateful day. Some believed she still watched over Altheris, her spirit entwined with the tree, ensuring its vitality. Others said she had fulfilled her purpose and returned to the forest depths, waiting for another soul worthy of her trials. One day, a young girl ventured to the tree, her tiny hands clutching a single wilted flower plucked from the roadside. She knelt at the base of the tree and placed the flower there, as though offering it to an unseen presence. When she looked up, the tree seemed to glow brighter, its branches dipping slightly, as if bowing in acknowledgement. The girl ran back to her village, her laughter trailing behind her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She told her family that the tree had spoken to her, not in words, but in feelings, a warmth that filled her heart and told her that their prince was still with them, watching, protecting. Though years turned into decades, the tree never withered. It stood as a reminder of sacrifice and renewal, its blossoms carrying the essence of a story passed from one generation to the next. The people of Altheris honored it not with rituals or grand ceremonies, but with quiet acts of kindness, inspired by the prince who had given everything for them. And in the forest, where the maiden's legend had first been born. The trees whispered to one another, their leaves murmuring tales of a prince who had not sought glory, but had found it nonetheless. The Spring Maiden, it was said, smiled beneath her veil of blossoms, her test complete, her chosen soul proving worthy beyond measure. For Altheris, the drought was a memory, distant yet vital, a reminder that even in the direst moments, there existed a spark of hope waiting to be kindled. And so, beneath the shade of the tree of renewal, life continued, vibrant and unyielding, as the whispers of the blossoms carried the story of the Spring Maiden's veil and the prince who became its eternal guardian.